All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating subjects imaginable, the human mind. Welcome to our crash course on the wild, weird, and wonderful science of psychology.
Or, have you ever said something and the second it leaves your mouth, you wish you could just grab the words and stuff them back in? Well, those bizarre dreams, those little verbal stumbles, all those gears constantly turning in your head. That's all your mind at work. And that's exactly what psychology tries to figure out.
And it's no joke. I mean, think about it. That 3-pound, kind of squishy thing between your ears, it is literally the most complex object we know of in the entire universe. Yeah, the rules that run it can feel, well, pretty mysterious. But hey, that has never ever stopped us from trying to crack the code.
Okay, let's be honest. When I say the word psychology, what's the first image that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's that classic picture, right? Someone lying on a couch, talking to a therapist who's probably got a beard, a notepad, maybe a cigar, and that image, of course, is all thanks to one guy, Sigmund Freud. But there is so much more to the story.
So first up, we're going to move way beyond that famous couch and dig into what this science is actually all about. Look, don't get me wrong, Freud was an absolute giant. His ideas about childhood, dreams, personality, they basically shaped how the 20th century thought about itself. He was a total game changer. But here's the thing. He didn't invent psychology, and the story most definitely did not end with him. The truth is, psychology is this huge, messy, beautiful melting pot. It's a science that's really defined by the massive questions it dares to ask, the incredible range of methods it uses to hunt for answers, and all the different, sometimes competing, sometimes complementary schools of thought that make it up.
And about those big questions, well, they are not new. Not at all. Humans have been wrestling with the mysteries of the mind for literally thousands of years. Let's jump back in time for a second.
It's actually pretty wild when you look at the history. You got Aristotle way back around 350 BCE pondering consciousness. He got the location wrong, thought it was in the heart, but hey, he was asking the right questions. 2,000 years ago in China, rulers were giving the world's first psychological exams to people who wanted to be public officials. And then, in the late 800s, you have this Persian doctor, Rhazes, who was one of the very first to actually describe mental illness and treat patients for it in a special hospital ward. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that from these ancient thinkers all the way up to today, psychology has always been about tackling the really big stuff. What even is consciousness? Are we really in control? Do we have free will? And what is mental illness, and how can we help?
Okay, but asking big questions is one thing. Trying to answer them with science? That's a whole different ballgame. So when did psychology make that leap and become an official science? Well, you can circle the year 1879 on your calendar. That's the moment. Over in Leipzig, Germany, a physician named Wilhelm Wundt sets up the very first laboratory dedicated entirely to psychological research. And boom, that's it. That's the official starting gun for scientific psychology. And as soon as psychology became a science, the debates started. The first big one was between two schools of thought, structuralism and functionalism. Structuralism, which was Wundt's baby, was all about asking what is the mind made of. They tried to break consciousness down into its most basic bits, kind of like a chemist breaking down a compound. The problem? Their main tool was asking people to report on their own thoughts, which is, super subjective. Then along came functionalism, led by the brilliant William James. He was inspired by Darwin and asked a totally different question. Why does the mind do what it does? He wanted to know the purpose, the function of our behaviors. And that practical approach, focusing on how our minds help us survive, is what really paved the way for the psychology we know today. And right into this brand new scientific world steps, you guessed it, Sigmund Freud, ready to kick off a revolution all his own. So the story goes, it all kicked off when Freud learned about a patient of a colleague, a woman they called Anna O. What was so amazing was that her physical symptoms actually got better the more she just talked about her traumatic memories. This idea of a talking cure was a massive breakthrough, and it basically set the entire course for Freud's career. He took that insight and he ran with it. In 1900, he published his massive work, The Interpretation of Dreams, and laid out his brand new theory. He called it psychoanalysis. And at the heart of it was an idea that was, it was completely radical for the time. And what was that radical idea? It was the concept of the unconscious mind. Freud proposed that all of us are being pushed and pulled by mental processes that we're not even aware of. Now, today, we kind of take that for granted. But back in 1900, whoa,
That was a mind-blowing concept. The thought that you aren't fully in control of your own mind, that it's being driven by some hidden force, that was just as wild and controversial as the theory of evolution.
And you really can't overstate how huge this was. Before Freud, if you had a serious mental illness, you were often just locked away in a sanatorium. That was it. Freud's big breakthrough was saying, wait a minute, these conditions aren't a life sentence. He argued that they could actually be understood and maybe even healed just by talking and through self-discovery. It was a complete paradigm shift. But even with a giant like Freud, psychology didn't stand still. It just kept growing, kept evolving, becoming this really rich science that pulls ideas from all over the place. So for the first half of the 20th century, this new kid on the block called behaviorism started to take over. Thinkers like B.F. Skinner basically looked at all the psychoanalysis stuff and said, you can't see thoughts or feelings, so how can you study them scientifically? They argued that real psychology should only focus on what you can actually see, observable behavior. Forget the mind, let's just study what people do. And just like that, the melting pot got even bigger and more interesting. Today's psychology is a mix of everything. You've got the descendants of Freud's theories, you've got the legacy of behaviorism, and you've got other heavy hitters like humanist psychology, which is all about personal growth. Plus, now we have the amazing fields of cognitive science and neuroscience, which let us literally peer inside the brain as it works. Which brings us finally to the modern definition of psychology. It's the science of behavior and mental processes. See how that works? It's the perfect combination of everything we've talked about. It takes the behaviorist idea that we need to observe what people do, but it also totally embraces that internal world of thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that Freud was so interested in. And really, is it any wonder the field is so huge and diverse? I love this quote from the astronomer Owen Gingerich. This is a guy who stares into the vastness of space for a living, and he said that the human brain is, by far, the most complex physical object known to us in the entire cosmos. Just let that sink in for a moment. And here's the kicker. Every single one of us has one, right now. Inside our heads, one of these unbelievably complex, incredible objects. So the only real question left is, what are you going to do with it?